we are talking about what is going to be expected of our Vets in Tech cohort. At the end, we are going to be presenting at least 3 to 5 minutes with some sort of beginning, middle, and end. And in our introduction, we want to include our name as well as the branch that we served in, the technologies used, such as JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. Hint, hint. And now we're going to also showcase a demo, either doing it live or recording it. So if you want to, you can actually record yourself using the app and just show that video. And then finally, in our code, we want to go over at least one component, feature, function that you are proud of. And we want you to be able to walk through the code using accurate terminology in a comprehensible manner. So as long as you understand what functions and variables are and you're able to read through your program and tell me this is a for loop, this is a function, this does that, then you are set. And if you want, you can record yourself doing this at home and showcase that. Other topics, project management. I'm not a project manager. You do want to list your challenges and your successes. One thing that makes a great presentation is like some of the things that I experienced that were a roadblock were X, Y, and Z. One thing that I thought that went really great was, ABC. So that's their challenges and your successes, and then finally just like a little recap on something you learned. So that's what we're going to be expecting of you in your final presentation. So we're talking 2 weeks out, right? And that's why I wanted to get started on HTML today, because I want to get you guys started on that foundational language that essentially is going to house our JavaScript, but HTML is going to show the JavaScript, right? So in our unit over here, go to the HTML. And it shows us, and again, I want you guys to go through this personally as well, because this is actually pretty well done. And it shows you, so our intro to HTML starts right here, and we're talking about indentation. HTML, the way it works is with every nested element, we're going to indent one time. So all that happens is we have one element, and you can just think of this as 1 or A, right? So we have A, but then B is below A, so B goes indented one time. But then C is inside of B, so we indent it one more time. So this shows you kind of like a nested structure of how the website is going to be displayed, and I can even show you guys this right now by just pulling up the terminal. And again, we have our body, which every single HTML page is going to have. I'm looking at the HTML of this web page right now. This is production HTML. So a div is going to be a HTML element where we can house either images or text. It's actually really versatile. And you'll notice that divs are probably the most versatile and most widely used HTML element because they are so verbose and you can do so much with them. Oops, I did not mean to pump that up that much. Let me pull this over so we get a better look. There we go. So these are script tags. These are actually importing JavaScript. We can see here it's referencing the DOM. I don't expect you guys to understand this right now, but when it says window.settings, it's talking about our actual window right now. If I console log window, it tells me my window. Now, let's see, window.open. I opened a new tab. You see that? I did that with code. So when I'm looking in this HTML and I see this script tag, this is JavaScript. Oh, hey, there's me. Wow, that's a bunch of that's a bunch of information right there. So we have a ton of scripts, right? var. And this is minified. So when you see it says var and it's just a single letter, that means that they ran it through a special, you could think of it as a compiler, but it's not. It trims your code down to like the smallest possible pieces, so that way it's kind of hard for like hackers and people who are trying to break into your website to read it. Now, this is kind of a null point because there's things called unminifiers, which will unminify your JavaScript, but that's why this looks super confusing, because this is not actually how this is written. They did not declare W as window. They did not declare IC as w.intercom. They declared it as a bunch of very long words, and then they ran it through a minifier, which ended up obfuscating their code. And again, we're talking about JavaScript, but this is an HTML element of a script tag. Again, we see more divs. Let's open up main. We see another script tag. It's leading to some more JavaScript. Div. We see another div. So we're going to be dealing with probably quite a few divs in our HTML adventures. More divs. And you can see when I mouse over some of them, like this one, it contains all of the content on this web page. So when we're talking about properly indenting our code, all this is saying is this is the coding convention for HTML. I have an example for you guys. And this is like part of your challenge too. Ooh, an update, release notes. Did I get rid of it? I think I did. So, okay, I'll come back to that in a second because it's the challenge at the bottom of this page. So, it's showing us here the way to indent things. And you may notice that every single tag that doesn't start with this opening forward slash, let me rephrase this. Every single tag here has a corresponding closing tag indicated by a forward slash. And that's the same way with this H1. H1 stands for header. So this is a header. It's going to be very, very big. And we close off that HTML element by doing the same H1 code, but with a forward slash in front of it. So now the computer knows that we're done writing that H1 element. H2 is also a header, but it's just slightly smaller. It goes all the way up to 6, so it's H1 to 6. They're all headers. But essentially you can see the same thing. We're opening this HTML element, and now we're closing it over here. Now divs are different because they're meant to contain other HTML elements. And that's why we see them so much, because they're not necessarily, they're very versatile, and if you want you can have them be an image, you can have them display text and all these sorts of things, but at the end of the day, they're simply like a box for the computer to put HTML code inside. So this is one of the most rudimentary and basic HTML elements, and you'll probably see divs a lot. And once again, you can see it opens here. So this container is containing these two headers, and then it finally closes off here. So this container entirely is containing these two headers. And we know that because it finally closes off here. And then an HTML document is always going to have a body, and so this is essentially saying this is the end of the document. We start the document here, we end the document here. Does that make sense? Any questions? Cool. So indentation practice, right here is what's going to happen when you click on this JS Fiddle link. This is just going to get you in the habit of understanding that like nested indentation structure of HTML. And a really good way to understand how this works is if you don't see a closing tag. So I don't see a closing tag here. So that means that nav contains a UL. So I'm going to indent that. But I also don't see another closing tag. So that means that we have a nav, which contains an unlisted item, which coincidentally lists a listed item. This is typically how you'll see lists created. I'm guessing it's some HTML legacy thing. UL stands for unordered list. LI stands for list item. Since I don't see a closing tag, I'm going to indent twice. So we start at nav. I know that nav is the container for UL because I don't see a closing tag, so I indent it once. I don't see a closing tag for UL, so I know that LI is a child and it's contained by this UL element. Once again, A does not have a closing tag, so I will hit enter, bring it to a new line, and tab it over, so I know that LI is containing this A element. Again, I don't see a closing A tag until the very end right here. So when I hit enter and tab, we are finally done because we can see the span does close on the same line. I will hit enter and actually backspace to make sure that the A tag closes around the same indentation level as the other A tag. This is typically the HTML convention for proper code syntax, and it makes it a lot easier to read and understand. So in the same way, we want to make sure the A closing tag lines up with one another. We have an LI tag here, and finally, once again, we see a closing LI tag, so let's line that up. I indented twice, and now I'm set to go. Well, now we've kind of run into a weird problem, right? We have UL up here, and we've finished this LI, but now we start another LI. If you look down here, you'll notice that we actually close the UL all the way down here. So that must mean that all of these LI elements with all these other HTML elements inside of them are part of this overarching UL element. So let's go ahead and actually tab this into where this other LI element starts. Because when we close this element, we want to make sure we start the next element on the same indentation. And we're going to do the same thing. I don't see a closing tag for LI, so I'm going to hit enter and indent. Do I see a closing tag for A? No. Enter, indent. Now, I'm actually going to go ahead and say this is really dumb. I don't know why they did this, because they're trying to teach you proper HTML indentation. And if I was to properly indent this, it would look like this. Let me bring this back, and actually this needs to go, no, that's right. So we have this like weird floating me out in the middle of nowhere. So I don't know why they did that, but it would work. It's just, honestly, if we're talking about proper indentation, we should delete that and move it into the span. A span is an HTML element that is meant to display text. And as a matter of fact, that's what we're seeing over here. So for whatever reason, they made it so that like me was not part of the tag or something. I just threw it in there. And once again, A closes on the same indentation as the other A. Li opens here, Li closes here. Let's start the next Li element on the same spot, and hopefully you guys are starting to see a pattern. And we can see that everything is indented in a way that allows us to kind of easily look and see what's nested in what. Again, I'm going to delete this me, and I'm going to put it in between the span because I think that looks much neater. And now all of a sudden, instead of looking at this gobbledygooky HTML, we have a very nicely structured HTML document that shows us what corresponds to what. So now if I click this button, you see how UL opens here? If I click this button, I can see that nav contains the UL. So nav is essentially the parent HTML container. So let's open that back up. If we close li, this UL element contains several li elements. So here we have our, you can think of this as a div, essentially the nav. Think of the nav as a div. We have an unordered list, which is how you typically start a list. It's really weird. It does stand for unordered list, but it's how most people will actually write their list. So we have UL, we open that up, we create a bunch of opening and closing LI elements, and then finally close it off down here, and then below that we close off nav. This is like the hierarchical structure of HTML elements, and it's the same thing if I was to open this elements page as well. We have body, we have divs, and again, like, so when I clicked on that arrow on the left, it was the same thing as me clicking on the arrow on the left over here. So if you're really curious as to what production level HTML looks like, just go to some really popular websites and just see what they have written in there. And again, we're seeing divs all over the place. Div, div, div. We have a form, div, div. They're very, very common. So that's how you would properly indent HTML, is making sure that all of your elements actually display how they're nested by indenting them if there's no closing tag. So again, nav, there's no closing tag. I know that this new opening tag needs to be indented 1. There's still no closing tag, which means that this one needs to be indented 1. Still no closing tag, indented 1. Finally, we get to the end, and it's okay to have a opening and closing tag on the same line as long as that's the only thing inside of there, right? So this is perfectly fine right here, like this is. Even if this was much longer words or whatever, as long as this opens and closes on the same line, that's okay. The one thing we don't want is something like this, where we would have the opening on one line and then the closing on another. As long as it can open and close on the same line, that's what you want to strive for. And that's the first challenge. So writing valid HTML. We're going to talk about paragraph tags, headings, images, lists, tables, and links. So this is a paragraph tag. This is essentially like a span tag. They have different methods attached to them. If you were so curious as to figure out what they are, we can go back to W3 and we can find out. What's a P tag do? This is some, pardon me. This is some text in a paragraph. Awesome. The cool part is if I copied this actually, it would work in any HTML document. So if I go ahead and create a new file and I actually just paste this in, eventually, let's do this. Nope. I'm going to save this for later. I'm going to hold on to this to show you guys. My IDE, I thought new file would let me name it. Hang on. Let me do this with my terminal. Going to do showcase.html. The command I'm running is touch. That's how you create a file. As you can see here, my IDE immediately recognizes it as an HTML file. I'm going to double click it to get rid of the italics. And then when I paste in that P tag, all of a sudden it knows that it's HTML and the P's are colorized. Now you guys are all using VS Code, right? So real quick, let's take a break. I want you guys to go to your extensions. And I want you to type in HTML boilerplate. You should come to something that looks like this. Extensions is on this part right here. It should look like some building blocks or something like that.
It looks different. Mine doesn't look like that. It's still a square with a square instead.
Let me see. I'll pause.